Welcome to the First Team College Football Recruiting Show with former NFL QB Matt Sims, Irish Breakdown Recruiting Analyst Ryan Roberts, and former college long snapper Joe DeLeone.
You're tuned into the First Team College Football Recruiting Show. I'm Joe DeLeone, joined by former NFL quarterback Matt Sims, also the founder of Sims Complete QB. Also joining us, Ryan Roberts, Irish Breakdown Recruiting Analyst. Guys, we're moving on to receivers on today's show. We've got four very talented players. We've already broken down quarterbacks. We've already broken down running backs. Today we are getting into Zachariah Branch, Jurrion Dickey, Brandon Inniss, and then lastly, Shelton Sampson. Very talented crop of receivers for this 2023 recruiting class. Before we get into them, though, guys, I want to talk about what do we look for when we're evaluating these receiver prospects? Because one of the thoughts that I had that popped up in my mind, particularly with one of these recruits, that it's hard to sometimes project some of these things because the quarterback play isn't exactly where it might need to be to fully see what these guys can do, especially on those deep throws. The arm talent isn't always there. However, we get a full scope of what their athleticism is like, what their playmaking ability is like. Guys, what do we think? Matt, let's go to you first. What do we look for when we're evaluating these prospects?
Well, sometimes we actually get a better evaluation of the receiver when the quarterback isn't on the same level as him because he has to make more out of less. And you get to see the ability to track the football down the field at a much higher rate, too, because of the fact that he has to adjust the footballs that are maybe underthrown or potentially poorly thrown. But, really at the end of the day, I know one just from my experience of talking with my father and my brother. They share stories with me about the draft rooms of the Pittsburgh Steelers. A team that has done a great job of finding receivers throughout the years. Their main goal is to find guys that catch the ball really well. And I think out of this class that we see here today, these four guys, they catch the football really well and they're really well-rounded athletes.
Yeah, Joe, and for me, from the NFL draft work especially, I'm a big fan of players that can win in multiple ways. That's kind of where my allegiance kind of lies. And one thing that I find consistent is there's different ways to create separation. I think people usually think of this as just an athletic thing, but you have players that have the athleticism to uncover deep, to track the football well. You have guys that are pristine route runners who get in and out of breaks and create instant and easy separation that way. And then you have bigger guys that elevate in the air and win in contested catches. And that is a way of separating, right? You can separate to the catch point in the air, which I think people don't talk about enough. So for me, if a player can do multiple of those things, that's when you're really cooking, because you can find a player that just does one thing really well and you can take advantage of that and that fills a role. But if you have a guy that can create separation and win in multiple ways, that's where a player turns from a good player to a great player or from a great player to an elite player, in my opinion.
And the athleticism is definitely on display with all four of these guys. And going right into our first player, Zachariah Branch, that athleticism, that juice is an understatement for this player. 5'10", 172 pounds, number one ranked guy for 247 Sports from Bishop Gorman High School in Las Vegas, Nevada, currently committed to USC and the Trojans. Man, they got themselves a really talented deep threat. I was watching Zachariah Branch, and this dude can fly. And there's a lot of other things that are to be excited about, but that speed is something that you don't really get with a lot of recruits. Matt, what are your thoughts on Branch as a player?
My first initial reaction was just the reincarnation of Devin Hester. I mean, when I see him punt return, it's ridiculous. The ability to obviously field the punt, and in multiple highlights, he's fielding the punt with his back completely turned to the special teams unit. So the cojones to be able to do that. And then to catch the ball, right, to field it calmly, turn, change direction. I mean, his quick twitch, suddenness, and change of direction is super elite. Super elite. I just couldn't get over the fact of that. Just alone, USC, you're getting a really good special teams talent. And that is something that is hugely important for these teams when they try to make it into the playoffs.
I love that Devin Hester comp on the special teams, man. I'll say this. He's got a little Jalen Waddle in his game, too, as far as being a pure wide receiver.
Totally.
You said it perfectly, man. He is incredibly twitchy, changes directions effortlessly. He's one of those dudes that like really doesn't have to slow down to get in and out of breaks. Like he just kind of rolls and he just explodes in and out of breaks. And he's, for me, a player, Joe, that I think is going to be a multi-level threat with how the game is played today. Like he's going to be able to uncover deep, because one thing I loved about his game was he is just absurdly good at tracking the football down the field. He kind of melts to the ball outside the numbers, which is just it's a nuanced thing. Like a lot of guys aren't natural at that, but he has that to his game. He has the dynamite speed. And with how the game has changed today with such an RPO implementation and the screen game, this kid's going to be able to uncover short, intermediate, and deep at the next level. He's a dynamic player, going to probably work inside a ton at the next level, but also I think that dynamic deep speed is going to allow him to play to the field a little bit outside the numbers as well, kind of trying to uncover deep. So he's really a multi-level threat. He's a super exciting athlete. Devin Hester, Jalen Waddle, he's got shades of everyone.
Yeah, which is like, what a cast of characters to be complimented in. And it's noticeable too. And I think for USC, they're finding a football player that, like you're saying, they can use him in just about every position possible. And even too with that returning ability, I wouldn't be shocked if you see him lining up at running back and throwing screens to him, receiver screens, bubble screens, the same way that we see, Miami Dolphins utilizing Tyreek Hill and Waddle right now, just multiple ways to get him the football in space, because when he does, he makes teams pay. And really what you try to do as an offensive coordinator is you try to create like fake punt or kick returns for him as much as you possibly can in the offensive side of the ball. And the more that you can do that, the more successful he's going to be, because he is a dangerous player in space. And I totally agree with you too. His tracking of the football is definitely a high level. That is, again, one of those things that I think a credit to this generation, again, with just playing a lot of 7-on-7, running and catching and throwing right. Just there was one highlight. He's looking over his right shoulder. The ball is thrown to the complete opposite side of him. He catches it in stride and runs for a touchdown. Like that's stuff that you really just don't see on an everyday football field.
And it makes it look effortless too, Matt, which is it's totally rare, man. It's absolutely rare.
And sometimes with these faster guys, the hands might not always be there because they're just reliant on their speed, but he brings that to his game. The other thing that, just to round out what you guys are talking about, Ryan, you mentioned earlier wanting guys that are going to win at every single level, and he does that. He can beat guys deep. He's got the route running ability. He's got the speed to get open deep and get balls thrown to him down the field. But the main thing that makes him, I think, so dangerous is what he does in space. That ability to play as a kick returner with the ball in his hand and on screens, on short routes, on various things like that. When we're looking at a player like Branch, he's somebody who I think works in really easily early on into his career. But the other thing, we're thinking about what Lincoln Riley has done in his time as a coach with the Sooners and now with the Trojans. He's loved players like this, which doesn't surprise me that he is currently committed to USC, that he is going to play for Lincoln Riley. And I think back to I know Hollywood Brown was a lot smaller. He was a little bit closer to like 5'8". I think Branch's measurement at 5'10" might be a little bit generous, but seeing a smaller, compact, explosive receiver like Branch, it makes a lot of sense that he is going to be playing at USC.
Yeah, no, it does. It's a great fit. I would say it's the two M's for me, Joe, that I always talk about, right? You're going to manufacture space and he's going to manipulate it. Like at the end of the day, like he's that type of dude. And Lincoln Riley has made a great living off of manipulating and manufacturing space during his career at Oklahoma. And he continues now at USC, what we've seen him doing with guys like Jordan Addison already in his short stint there. So I think it's a great fit, man. He's had these types of guys from the Kenny Stills of the world to the Marquise Hollywood Browns. He's had these guys that are just dynamos in space, and he has his next one in Zachariah Branch.
Matt, is that a lot of the same things that you noticed too, that what we're getting with him, putting him in with Lincoln Riley, he's going to be a really dangerous piece in a couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. And he's someone that definitely takes advantage of the talent that is around him. And, I think one of the things that they'll be extremely excited about too, when they see him, on the field and their practice field, at least what I get from when I'm watching his film is he looks like he's a really tough runner, and he doesn't look like he shies away from contact too. And that's something as a punt returner, kick returner, receiver, just Swiss Army knife guy. You want to see that toughness. And that is definitely something that I notice about him as you watch his highlights, that he is a tough runner. He doesn't shy away from contact. He is low to the ground, so he is a tough tackle. And USC is getting a super talented football player. I was extremely excited as soon as I turned on this highlight film. Like, this dude is a baller for sure.
Now, I know it's difficult to fully project how quickly guys get onto the field, but when we're talking about the number one player at his position and one of the top recruits in the class overall, do we see a possibility that this is a guy who contributes as a freshman? Do we think, based on his tape and what we've watched, he has the traits and is developed fully enough to maybe step in and not start right away, but get onto the field early for USC?
You have to departmentalize and capitalize with this type of player, man. Like, he's too electric to keep off the field. Like, we talked about his punt return ability. He needs to be involved in the punt return game early. And we know that USC's depth chart at wide receiver is pretty crazy right now. I mean, you're going to expect a guy like a Jordan Addison to be out the room soon, but you still have, the talented players of like the Brendan Rices of the world and the young guys like CJ Williams in the room already. But I mean, Joe, for me, it's malpractice not to get this kid involved in the return game. And then also in the passing game, man, like if you want to call him a gadget player year one, that's fine. Either way, though, he's going to have some type of wrinkle on this offense where I'm going to be able to take advantage of his athleticism. Like, he's just too dynamic to keep off the field, in my opinion.
Yeah, special teams is the easy way for him to get interjected into the, game flow really quickly, easily, right from the get-go. And then really the rest is just kind of depending on his, football IQ and how much he can digest, as a young freshman, and understanding the offense and where he fits into the roles that they put him in. But, the cool thing is like you said earlier, just can play outside, can play inside. I mean, like, there's going to be a lot of ways to manufacture completions to him if they so choose that.
Yeah, very, very explosive football player. And I think that ability to get him on the field early is something that they need to at least figure out. And if it's just as a punt returner, if it's him catching kicks, get him on the field doing that to start. And that'll be a huge impact for the Trojans, just to have that extra guy, even if he's the fifth guy down on the depth chart, to get him onto the field is going to be very impactful for them this upcoming season. Now, we're talking about a soon-to-be Trojan, and this other guy, number 2, Jurrion Dickey, has some shades of a former Trojan that I'm going to bring up in a second. Currently number 2 in the class, per 247 Sports. Menio Atherton in Palo Alto, California, 6'3", 210 pounds, currently committed to Oregon. Got to say, one thing I noticed right off the bat, his build, his size. He's built like some linebacker recruits. He already has that bulk added to his frame, which is very rare to see with some of these taller receivers. Isn't always necessarily the case. But the one thing that really popped with me when I was watching Dickey, guys, is that jump ball ability. Plays like a basketball player when the ball's in the air, just plucks the ball out of the air so easily. And that comp I was referring to, and Matt, you're gonna get to know Ryan more. Ryan hates it when we force comps, but I'm gonna make one right now. I get a lot of.
I do it all the time. My bad, man. I'm just trying to give our viewers something. Obviously.
Matt, you have good comps. You're allowed.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ones.
To clarify,
because I got another one here.
Ryan approves of it as long as it's a good comp. He just doesn't like it when we force it. That's when, and he'll tell us.
That's fair. Yeah, I get that.
Ryan will definitely tell us when we force it. And so let's find out if I force this one, Ryan. I get a lot of Drake London when I watch him play. I get a ton of that when I see him, because Drake London, former basketball player, was a basketball player at USC, comes on over and plays on the football team as well, and then full-time a football player. And those shades of basketball come right into his game, and that is what he is known for. That's what earned him a top 10 draft selection to the Atlanta Falcons this past year. And I'm starting to see a little bit of that with Junior Dickey, man. He takes the ball out of the air like he's going up for a rebound. Ryan, do you agree? No, maybe not.
Joe, that wasn't that bad, man. I thought I was going to be really upset about that. I thought you were about to throw like a Juju Schuster comp out there or something like that.
I was actually going to say Larry Fitzgerald. That's what I was thinking when I watched it.
I like that.
Sorry, Joe. I just won that battle.
Stole the thunder on that one.
Sorry, brother.
Well, Joe, what I love about it, though, and what I love for both comps is the basketball thing that you kind of opened with, right? The backgrounds. When you look at Jurrion Dickey, he actually has a basketball background, right? Like he plays like that. I mean, he has a verified 78-inch wingspan with 33-inch arms on top of being 6'3", 210 pounds. And he's what I would call a springy athlete, right? Like he gets up, elevates, plucks the football at the highest point. So you can see that basketball background, man. The kid plays extremely, extremely big. And I think his straight line speed, I think, is solid. But what he has, though, in my opinion, is I think he's explosive in tight spaces, right? Like he can get on top of guys and he can use that incredible frame to really extend and pluck the football and win at the highest point at consistently across the board. So I like both comps, man, because like I said, this is a massive kid, basketball background, springy, wins in the air. Lot to like about Jurion Dickey.
Now, I'm curious too, like, is the lack of separation at the line of scrimmage because he's a two-way player, because he plays defense, and that's something where
good. And he's good on defense.
He's really good on defense. He absolutely is. Now, I don't know if he can play corner at the next level at his size, but yeah, that's where I kind of get curious about like what his true speed is, because I do see clips where it looks like he has fresh legs, and there is like a different level of acceleration and ability and power to his running. But then you see some other clips where you're like, all right, this dude is clearly tired. This is late in the game. They're throwing it up to their best player on play number 85 of the game for him when he's been on both sides of the football. So that's where I'm curious to see, kind of what happens to him when he gets more solidified on one side of the football. I honestly wonder too, if he's one of those guys, like, is he going to get to a college weight room and put on like 30 pounds and then become like a dominant tight end?
I was thinking that too.
It's always possible.
Like when I see him, I almost see like, dude, it might be in your best interest, Dickey. Like if you can go and win against linebackers on every play, like go and do that, because, at 6'3", 210, he already looks like he's 220. He might be doing the opposite of Branch, where he's like, no, I'm actually lighter than you think I am, so he's good route runner, high points the football ridiculously well, catches the football above his head. And yeah, I just thought that like his tracking was extremely, extremely high. Like I just thought that for a guy that size to be able to kind of put his foot in the ground, jump up, and just outreach every defender on the field, I thought was super impressive. So he's an exciting football player, and I'm curious to see kind of how it plays out for him at the next level.
I like the development talk that you kind of got into there, Matt, too, because not only does he play both sides of the football, and like you said, like, I mean, the kid's going to be tired at some point, right? So you might not see a consistent, like, what is his athletic upside on a snap-to-snap basis, because he's just being overused a little bit.
Right.
It's also on the next level when he is just laser focused on one position and the nuance of that position. Maybe there is more looseness in the hips where maybe he could separate more as a route runner than we've seen on film at this point, right? So I think the nuance of the position and just the freshness of his ability as a athlete, I think is stuff that we should really keep an eye on, because this kid might be a better athlete than he consistently shows on film, just because he is given such a heavy workload on both sides of the ball.
Right. Like we know he's a good athlete. We know that. We definitely agree on the fact that we don't see the same explosion as we see Branch on the field. And I think that is because of the fact that he is playing two ways. I think it is that he has a high workload at the moment. But yeah, I think there is tremendous upside to this player. I think at the end of the day, he's a football player like a lot of the guys on this list. And anytime that you're adding good, well-rounded football players to your program, it's never a negative.
One thing I want to backtrack a little bit on what you said, Matt, about the tight end stuff. And I totally agree with that being on the table and being a possibility. And we consider what Dan Lanning is coming from at Georgia, who's now the head coach at the University of Oregon. That's a team and an offense that is very focused on tight ends, to the point where they had 3 at the beginning of the season. Eric Gilbert may or may not still be a part of that team, where they had 3 really talented tight ends of different shapes and sizes and abilities. And now you have with Dickey heading to Oregon, albeit Lanning as a defensive coach, he's going to maybe carry over some of those philosophies, and you can understand him already doing that, carrying those things over, going after a big receiver like this. So maybe, heck, like you're talking about, Matt, I think that is 100% on the table for a guy like Dickey to develop into like a Kyle Pitts type tight end, where he's mostly a receiver, but is still slotted in as the Y in this offense and is asked to be considered to be a tight end, but maybe not asked to block a whole lot. He's already got the strength. He's already got the baseline build to work his way into being 240 pounds. But do you guys agree that like that's
totally
more on the table than I think maybe some others might realize?
Totally. I think, the whole like tight end thing isn't what it was like 10, 15 years ago. Now, tight end just basically means that you're bigger than the rest of the receiver core, and we're just going to match you up against players that aren't on the same level as you that are covering you, and we expect you to be bigger than the safety that's covering you when you're throwing the football, and we expect you to outrun or juke the linebacker that's covering you. And that's something that like at the next level in college and in the pro is extremely important, because safeties are getting bigger and faster and linebackers are getting smaller and faster. So it's one of those things where it's just like you need to find matchups wherever you can. Dickey's ability to catch the football is high level. Putting him against college linebackers, I think, is a matchup that favors in Oregon all the time, if he continues to develop as a route runner, because that's something too, again, with fresh legs, that's where I want to see the next development of his game. Just more dynamic route running ability, because of course we don't see it in high school. He's the best player on his team. Yep. Run straight, dude, and we're going to throw you the football. Like that's literally what they're coaching him to do. Just run down there and we're going to throw you the 50-50 football because you're going to outjump this kid that's covering you. So at the next level, he's got to have to develop a little bit more feel on the field, route running, where he is in the zone, or how to separate versus man. Those would be the next, question marks for him as he develops.
Joe, don't you remember on Twitter a couple years ago when everyone was trying to have the debate of, is Kyle Pitts really a wide receiver or is he a tight end? And I'm just like, who cares? He's an offensive weapon. Like it doesn't matter to me. You can call him a big slot. You can call him a boundary receiver. You can call him a tight end. I don't care what you call him. All I know is that Jirion Dickey is going to make some plays on the next level and be a mismatch weapon.
Right. Well, not to distract this conversation too much, but it does matter a little bit because Arthur Smith is currently using Kyle Pitts very incorrectly and asking him to block straight line.
All right, now hold on. That's another podcast. I know. That's another podcast. We don't get paid for that podcast, so we're not talking about it. All right.
That's a fair point. Matt, I wanted to ask you this before we transition to the next guy, Brandon Inniss, on here. Being a college quarterback and coming in as a freshman, we've got Dickey coming in with Dante Moore. They're part of the same class, and they're going to be developing chemistry. When you've got a player of this style who is you can trust in these 50-50 situations, and then on top of it, a guy that's in your recruiting class, like what does that mean? And like, how does that help with your development as a quarterback, having a guy like this in your arsenal?
I think it's just a great opportunity for both of them to build a rapport with each other extremely quickly. And they're going to be the 1-2 matchup that you see, early on in practice, whether they're playing or on the field immediately. It's like they're going to be the guys that are tearing up the first team defense on scout team. And then they're going to be the guys that just have that like great, connection in the spring game, just because the amount of time that they spend with each other on and off the field, and that's where their rapport is really going to just, play in their favor going forward. And, what a cool 1-2 combo for Oregon to get these football players. And I'm sure, Moore had a lot to do with the fact of, I don't know this for a fact, but like was Moore a reason why Dickey chose Oregon? Because, it would be for me, if I knew that I had a really good quarterback going to a school or vice versa, like I absolutely would be like, yeah, let's go there. Let's do this together, man. Let's take over the world and be, in Ducks legend history forever.
Well, that's why you always see quarterbacks kind of join recruiting classes kind of early on in the process, because they are like the gatekeeper to the recruiting class, right? It's like, all right, come on now. These are, and that's the best. That's one of the best recruiting tools, especially for wide receivers. And you actually see wide receivers usually kind of come to classes a little later in the process, usually because of that simple fact. They want to know who's throwing them the football. But I mean, Joe, what gets me excited about the Dante Moore Jurrion Dickey combination is a couple things that I loved about Dante Moore's game, I think really translate well to Jurrion Dickey. One's the back shoulder game. I think that's something that Dante Moore is going to be able to take advantage outside the numbers. And the other one is that Dante Moore is a really quick and smooth processor, gets the ball out quick. Like, I think that's something that with the size that a Jurrion Dickey has, like he's just going to uncover short, and they're going to have a lot of easy completions just with the length that he has and what he brings to the football field. So I really do love the combination of those two players together. I think that they work off of each other's strengths really well.
I know we're spending a lot of time on Dickey. Last question before we get to Ennis. Do we think that the Dante Moore and Dickey combo is the best that we have in this recruiting class? Because I know Malachi Nelson's a nice player and Branch is really freaking talented, who we just talked about. But right now, I see this on paper, and as we're talking about this, I think that this is easily the best pairing. I think like you put both these guys together, they're going to light it up in a couple of years when they're both starting.
Yeah, I mean, as the Samurai Master once said, we'll see. So, there's a lot of question marks out there. And listen, it's exciting on paper for sure. But yeah, for them to actually go out there and produce, that's a whole nother question. The ability that they have, the raw ability they have, there's definitely a lot of things that point in a positive direction for Oregon and for Dante Moore for sure.
Yeah, and I mean Malachi Nelson and Zachariah Branch is a pretty dynamic and exciting combination
it is,
too.
Yeah.
So it's
different though.
Yeah, very different to your point, Joe. But I agree that I think Dante Moore, Jurrion Dickey is going to be a really exciting combination. But I think we have a couple of those on the list, which makes it really exciting for the next level.
Interesting. Like, I just want to make this one point. The one thing is about USC, there's a little bit of a different, sex appeal to them, to where they could every year get like a transfer quarterback or the next 5-star where, like Nelson could be a fantastic quarterback, but he could be in one of those situations too, almost like Matt Castle, where it's like he's a great quarterback, but he keeps getting passed up by the guy that's younger or highly touted or has the better NIL deal. And yeah, Ryan, I know you kind of like that comp too a little bit, right? But it's just one of those things where it could be an interesting dynamic there, where I don't think Dante Moore has to be quite as concerned with that at Oregon, because it's not like every quarterback is knocking down the door to Oregon to go there. That's
true. And Bo Nix is out the door after this season too, hopefully. Finally. But
thankfully.
All right, guys. You guys are rough, man. Take it easy, man. He's the young man,
We say it in good jest. We're not.
Yeah, follow Joe on Twitter. Joe just like crushes guys on Twitter every weekend. It's actually really hilarious. I appreciate it, but
Ryan doesn't like me on Twitter. That's a completely separate.
I only comment on stuff on your stuff, Joe, when I disagree with you. So
and then you subtweet.
That's basically the main reason for Twitter.
That's also true.
That's the only thing people use Twitter for.
All right, guys, let's get to number 3 on our list. Brandon Inniss, number 3 wide receiver per 247 Sports, American Heritage High School, Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 6 foot, 190, currently committed to the Ohio State, going to play for Brian Hartline if he still is there. Guys, Inniss, very unique amongst this group because he played everything for this offense. He was playing quarterback, he was playing receiver. Basically, however they could get him the football, they were asking him to do pretty much everything to make all the big plays for this team. And I mentioned earlier, you're watching some of these guys and it's hard to really figure out like how good are they with the arm talent that they're getting, because he was basically the best arm in this offense when he was playing receiver. There were instances where he had to come back to the football. Now that didn't matter for Ennis because this guy, the definition that just popped up right in my head as soon as I was watching him, this is a pure yak guy. This is a yards after catch, slippery, hard to tackle, fights for extra yards. You give him a screen, you give him a short pass, he's going to pick up those extra yards and do whatever it takes to get them. And it makes sense because he's playing quarterback and he's almost a wildcat quarterback the way that he's utilized for his team. Do you guys get the same sense there? Ryan, let's head to you first on this one, that like he's just a pure guy that is going to get yards any way that he can.
See, Joe, when I played football, I can't relate to this, but this kid has probably just been the best athlete on the field his entire life. Like he's just that guy. And it's you see it, him running wildcat and him running just anything to get him the football in the air. I mean, it's incredible to watch. And one thing I would say to Matt's point when we started the show, where he said, like, the quarterbacks that maybe don't have as much, if you're not playing with a quarterback with as much talent or the best arm, it actually can help you in a lot of ways. And I think that Brandon Inniss is one of those, because you see his clips of wide receiver where he's only 6 foot, 190 pounds. He's not the biggest guy that we're talking about today, but he attacks the football in the air and has great body control through contact. So this kid's a really good athlete, just all the way around. I think he's quick twitch. I think he has good straight line speed. I think he's springy. And he's competitive, I think, is one of the biggest things that I love to see about him. And it just exudes confidence, Matt. Like it's one of those things where, like, I talk about people about this all the time. It's like some wide receivers, you can't really quantify it with a 40 time or a vertical leap all the time, but some of them are just dogs, man. Like they just have that alpha to them, right? And this is what I see with a Brandon Inniss. Like this kid, every time the ball's in the air, he thinks he deserves to have that football. And that's one thing I love about his game.
Yeah, I wish that he had like a play where he just dropped back and threw it as high as he could and then ran underneath and got it like you see on social media, where the guys are running through the house and catching their own pass. Because like that's just what he reminds me. He's just like that. He's the ultimate athlete. He really is. He does a little bit of everything really well. There's really no like huge flaws to his game. I think the only flaw to his game really is the fact that he's in an offense that doesn't allow him to actually get experience or valuable experience at, running routes versus different looks and actually learning how to create separation consistently, because he's just in a situation where he's either at quarterback running the football, at quarterback throwing it and throwing it really well, actually. And then when he's running routes, he's really asked to do very simple things. He's receiver screens, go routes, and posts. And a lot of those times, like he does a good job of adjusting to the football. He makes a lot of plays. He runs well. He runs tough as well, too. His change of direction, I think, is pretty elite too. And I think, Ohio State is just getting one of those football players that they know is no matter what, he is going to be someone that, brings a lot to the table. And that'll be just the big question mark for him, is just kind of where he fits into their program going forward because of, the multitude of abilities that he has.
Joe, I don't know if you've seen him that much, but he actually reminds me of one player that Ohio State has right now in Emeka Egbuka.
Oh, I like
they
that.
remind me a lot of one another. I mean, he's not quite as big as Emeka, but Emeka's got that body type where you say, like, he can line up pretty much anywhere that he wants, but like the yak ability, the strength that he has, it's uncommon for a guy his size. So I think that he fits perfectly in Ohio State because I think he actually is pretty similar to a guy that plays for Ohio State right this second, if I'm being honest.
I need to force a comp, Ryan. So I need your thoughts on this. So I was trying to think of like
we should only get like a limit too on every show, like a force comps. Just like we should do something like that.
You get a quota of 2 every episode.
Or the better way is if you force one, you're not allowed to make another comp for the rest of the show. I think
I like that.
Okay, all right. And if you miss, then you don't get any, for the rest of the show.
All right.
Yes.
I like that. And both of you guys can help decide if this one's a miss. So I was thinking of who in the NFL was notoriously a yak guy and who just did so well after the catch. And immediately popped in my head, T.Y. Hilton is like that guy who just always was really great in yak. You guys don't like that comparison?
I hated that yak. I hated that one. I hate that comp. I hated it.
Matt, you
it didn't bother me. No, it didn't bother me as much. I was reacting more to Ryan's reaction, which was pretty funny. Immediately, just like so disappointed in you.
Yeah, I disappoint Ryan. The one question I wanted to ask with him though, and you guys were hitting on it, where because he's asked to do so many different things, he doesn't really have the same ability that these other guys do to develop into being a wide receiver. He's an athlete on the field for this team. And he's a little bit behind because of that. So for that reasoning, Matt, I want to ask you first from your playing days, like how much does this like slow down that process for him being ready to contribute and start, that he's a little bit less refined, but is currently just the most athletic guy in the field before he heads to a program where he's not going to be the most athletic guy in the field?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main thing is that when he goes to Ohio State, he's going to be in a room full of players that are very comfortable at the receiver position and have been playing receiver for the majority of their lives. So I think he's going to have a lot of people where he is just naturally going to be able to absorb a lot of information from by watching film, by getting those practice reps, right? By being around them, just again, like we mentioned in the QB thing, like I naturally learned a lot of lessons at quarterback just by sitting at my dining room table, with my family, or just sitting around and watching Sunday Night Football with my father and my brother when I was younger. Not because I actually wanted to be a quarterback when I was 7, but just being there helped me, And that's what I think is going to happen with him too. He's going to be in a room where they've had a ton of fantastic receivers over the past 7 or 8 years. They've become somewhat of a receiver U type of location. And I think he's going to be able to go back, look at that inventory and archive of film, watch what these great football players did, where they started, where they're going, where they're at now. And I think, the biggest thing is that he's a player that obviously can do a lot of things really well. And when you can do a lot of things really well, it's kind of like Mark Wahlberg and the other guys, when you can imitate really well as an athlete, it gives you a tremendous advantage to learn really, really fast. And clearly he can imitate playing a running back. He can imitate playing a quarterback. He can imitate playing a receiver. So I think he has a lot of upside to him as a football player. The problem is that Ohio State usually has like 4 or 5 of these guys every year. So that'll be his biggest issue, is just fighting for playing time, because there's a lot of good football players on that team.
I'll say this, Joe. One thing that I think Ohio State's done a really great job on, is I agree with everything that Matt just said, and I would say this too. It's the fact that Brandon Inniss does have all those traits where you say he can learn those things, right? Like the nuances of the position. He's going to be working with, maybe the best wide receiver coach in college football right now in Brian Hartline. Yeah. Like, he's to that point. And one thing that they've done, in my opinion, over the last few years is they've continued to restock that room, but you always see them be willing to departmentalize the players and get them on the field to be successful in a certain way, right? Like, none of those players, whether you're talking about Garrett Wilson or Jackson Smith-Njigba or Emeka Egbuka or Marvin Harrison Jr., like, none of them put up these stupid volume getting numbers as freshmen, but they all played a little bit, right? Like, they all kind of had their role in the offense. So while I agree that I don't think Brandon Inniss is going to come in and be the volume getter in the passing attack, because it's just going to be an overpopulated room, I think that we have seen with what Ryan Day and Brian Hartline can do as developers and as play callers, that they can see what Brandon Inniss does well, and they can get him on the field and ask him to do things that he's comfortable with early while he's continuing to round out his game. So again, I mean, if I'm a wide receiver, the question is, the question isn't why would you go to Ohio State? The question is, like, at this point, why wouldn't you go to Ohio State? They're going to develop you into a potential first round pick, and you're working with one of the best wide receiver coaches in college football, one of the best play callers in college football. Like, it's just a no-brainer at this point.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think part of it too is they're getting guys that are superstars right away that will make an impact right away. And I think to protect your room, to add to what you're saying, you need to get guys like Brandon to kind of fill that void, so you don't have these huge gaps between years where you don't have anybody. So he is somebody that, like, hey, let's bring him in. Maybe you redshirt him. You give him a year or two to kind of learn and get adjusted to the game. And then by his second or third year, he is that savage that they need him to be, that's out there winning 1-on-1 matchups consistently.
100%.
So, guys, number 4 to wrap us up here on our list, number 6 ranked wide receiver per 247 Sports, Shelton Sampson, Catholic High School, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 6'4", 181. And you could probably expect, if you're from Baton Rouge, you are committed to play at LSU. So Shelton Sampson, albeit he is the biggest player on this list that we're talking about, he's not necessarily the same way that we were talking about Dickey, but he is a glider. He is a fluid mover. This might be a 4.4 guy at 6'4", that fast that he moves, and he slides almost down the field, that he's that easy of a mover. The other thing too that just really stands out to me is the hands. And it's a different type of hands than what we talked about with Dickey. Like, that was more of like an aggressive, like, take the ball out of the air from a defender. I see softness in his hands. I see an ability to just grab the ball out of the air easily. And the first play on his highlight tape that we watched was him extending with his long arms and just letting the ball kind of land into his hands without having to struggle or do anything extra to catch it. So what we're getting with a guy like this, easy mover, gets downfield really easy, lean receiver, and really, really nice hands for a prospect.
So, Joe, he's ranked, according to 247 Sports, is the number 6 ranked receiver in the class. That could be very well where he is right now, but if he puts it all together, he might be the best receiver in this class. Like, he really might be, man. Like you said, he's 6'4", 181, plenty of room to grow. He's going to be 200-plus pounds in the blink of an eye, and this is a height, weight, speed freak, if I'm being completely honest, man. Like, he has some just silly acceleration, has those long arms, can pluck the football out of the air. Everything is there, man. Everything is there. And it makes so much sense, not only just the Louisiana stuff, but it makes sense he's going to LSU because he reminds me a lot of Terrace Marshall Jr. that came out of there a couple years ago. He was like the same guy going to LSU. And Terrace ended up being a good football player at LSU. But again, if Shelton Sampson puts it all together, man, he could be an absolute superstar. Like, I don't think there's any limitation to how good this kid can be if he develops properly.
Matt, do you approve of that comparison?
Yeah, I'm just, Joe, you don't have to agree, with his comparisons because clearly he doesn't agree with yours always. So I'm just laying that out there. But I do agree with the fact that Shelton Sampson potentially could be, I would say this. He's going to be a really, really good route runner and a good football player. Like, you could see that. Again, he is asked to do very little at the route running ability in high school, again, because he just can run by everybody. And he is definitely one of those guys when you watch the highlight, you're like, damn, I wish I had him in school, because you just want to throw bombs to this guy all the time, but tracks the ball extremely well. Glider, like you said, he definitely at times actually moves so fast that he gets tackled because he's moving like almost too fast to the people that are chasing him, which I think at the next level, it'll be a little bit easier for him and his speed to be taken advantage of. One of the cool things too, that I think, yes, he's going to improve his ability to run routes as he continues to be asked to do more at the next level. I think the coolest thing though for him is that like he is a true like X or a Z receiver to me. And when I say that, like he's a true like outside guy. I don't see him like in the inside doing a lot of change of direction stuff like we see Branch and, all that stuff. I see rocket screens from the outside to him potentially, but I see a lot of just like, hey, it's one-on-one in the boundary. He's going to be a completion 75% of the time because of his ability to threaten you deep or, to just take like easy hitches or slants because the guys are playing so far off of him. And that's something that I think is hugely advantageous for a college because when you put a guy like him at the X position, which is typically into the short end of the field, you're going to say, all right, are we going to really leave one guy out there to cover him one-on-one, or are we going to put a safety over the top? And then when you put the safety over the top, you're basically saying we have two people to defend one, which now gives the rest of your team and the rest of the field to be taken advantage of. And I think that's something that Shelton really does bring to a football team is that ability to, force a defense to play a particular way because of his skill set and ability.
Really well said, man. I like at the core of it, football is a game of numbers, right? Like you're going to attack where you have a numbers advantage. You're not going to attack where you don't have a numbers advantage. And this is a player that is going to create numbers advantages, to your point, across the field, right? Because with this vertical ability on top of being 6'4" and being able to pluck the football down the field,
right,
you have to keep eyes on him, man. Like you have to. Otherwise, you're putting a corner into a very unadvantageous situation. Disadvantageous? I don't know what the word is, Joe, but either way, he does not have an advantage in that situation working against a kid that is 6'4" and can run like this player can.
I've got a comparison before we wrap up.
And no, you can't anymore. We already asked those.
I only had.
Let me just hear it though. Let me hear it.
Okay. I only had one bad one. I think if we're talking about a 6'4" receiver who runs a 4.4 with really soft hands, I think George Pickens is a very fair comparison. I don't think you should hate that one, Ryan.
That's not that bad, man. You had a pass on that one. That was pretty good.
I'm glad. Every
tough
day
critic, man.
I seek the approval of Ryan daily, so this makes me happy that I got a not bad. At Joe DeLeone, at Sims Complete QB, at Rise and Draft on Twitter. Make sure you follow everyone across the board. Hit subscribe wherever you're tuning in. We will be back with more. We're going to do tight ends next, which is the big boys. Going to be a really fun discussion. Make sure you're around for when we get to that one.